What's changed in the world since you were a kid? Not nearly as much wildlife. As a kid I remember seeing so many native frogs, lizards, tarantulas, birds, etc. Now they're very rare to find, and what used to be open country is now urban sprawl. Strip malls, roads, and apartments crammed together as far as the eye can see. It makes me very sad. When I saw the stats about the decrease of insects population, I didn't have a hard time believing it. As a kid at my parents' place, I hardly could go outside in the evening without being covered in bug bites and seeing them fly almost in dark clouds all around me. Now if I see 5 or 6 in the whole evening I'm impressed. And my parents' place didn't change. There was no new constructions or anything around. They lived near the woods. And remember how terrible the information was? We'd use a card catalog and find the book to check the index, only to find our source has one scant sentence on our subject, which we would postulate into an entire paragraph for our essay. Most of the information was incorrect anyway. Have you gone back and read what we thought we knew about the solar system in a world book from 1996? It's criminal. Everybody used to smoke, in elevators, in classrooms, in the library, in restaurants, on airplanes, and just pretty much anywhere. Everybody used to drink a lot more than they do now. Alcohol was an important social lubricant until about maybe 1980. The tacit social dress code was much stricter and rigid. Hemlines might go up or down, but everybody had to conform to that. When mini skirts were in fashion, you didn't dare drop anything, because you would have to show everybody your chonies when you picked it up, and girls had to wear either a dress or skirt. Nowadays there is great freedom to choose what you wear: short dress, long dress, slacks, jeans, shorts, leggings, and about anything you want. I would have been sent home from school for wearing pants, and boy did your knees get cold in the winter. Grown-ups wore hats. Gloves were part of the feminine outfit when you got all dressed up. I remember wearing them with my Girl Scout uniform on formal Scout occasions. There used to be lots of nuns. Mass was in Latin. Telephones were clunky and had dials on the face of them. Nothing but landlines as far as you could see. Computers were pretty much all at NASA or in science fiction. There were no pantyhose, only gross garter belts and thigh-high stockings. If that sounds sexy to you, you never saw the kind most people wore. Women wore girdles, slips, and stockings. Don't get me started on the primitive arrangements for sanitary monthly necessities. TV was black and white and only had 3 channels. Kids used to play outdoors. There was segregation, which seemed strange, sort of a social mystery. Because why? When I suggested to my parents I might like to be a lawyer, doctor, or police officer, they told me girls couldn't do that. Why? Because that's just the way it is. I was not allowed by my mother to play a French horn in orchestra class because it wasn't ladylike. I was raised to be ladylike. I used to ride my bike or walk all over town, just like Opie. The only rule was be home when the street lights came on. You must be near my age, mid-60s. Everything you describe rings true to my experience. I grew up Methodist, so drinking was highly frowned on. So that was a little different than you. We stayed outdoors playing as a kid. My dad could whistle real loud, and when he whistled we had to get our butts home. Gave us a good 1-block radius to play in. You had better behave when you were out playing because the parents' network would have reported to your mom and dad any bad behavior before you could get home from, for example, committing the horrible sin of screaming a profanity. And bugs. There used to be so many. The June bugs. We would tether to a thread and fly around the yard until their leg came off. Hundreds of bees in the clover. We learned to be careful when running barefoot. So many differences, some good, some not so good. Hopefully our kids can be better stewards of the earth and get climate change under control. I have worries for my grandkids. A positive one is the attitude towards people with dwarfism. When I was a kid, and up until my teens, there was no question. We were just seen as a complete joke. The go-to points of reference of us at the time were many me, Oompa Loompas and Munchkins. I got bullied and mocked constantly, and the notion of me having a relationship or any kind of romantic life, forget it. Unless it's for the punchline for a joke. I felt extremely depressed and hopeless when I was a kid when I started to fully realize how all this really dehumanizing treatment I would get would be a staple in my entire life. Fast forward to now and I feel like things have taken a shift for the better, mostly thanks to representations like Tyrion Lannister from GOT. I can't overstate how much of an impact that has had on my life. Just from how different people now think about us and talk about us, I feel like I'm seen as more human now. There's still a long way to go and I still deal with a lot of shit, but I never thought things would actually change this much in my lifetime. It is very fun to see confident characters be hypocrites. In the Stormlight Archive series, there's a character who is kind of like the modern independent woman archetype. She is a middle-aged princess that doesn't want to marry and rejects the church in a very conservative setting. At one point we see a snippet of a treatise she wrote where she wants people to stop putting her in a box, but later on, we see her thinking about how her cousin will be so much happier if he would just decide whether he wanted to be a warrior or a scholar. But I want to say as a disclaimer that she's not super tropish. The author is very good as that, but a brief summary to give the idea won't be able to convey that nuance. It's funny. I can point to exactly when the internet turned sour. As soon as Facebook went public and people started migrating there from MySpace, the internet got too big for its britches and became the toxic thing that it is today. Smartphones exacerbated this trend. But before Facebook, the internet was largely a collection of hobbyists sharing with each other, with little expectation that it would get them anything. MySpace was social media by definition, but the vibe was very different. It was, as I feel, the intended purpose of it, to interact with people that you actually know. It wasn't about shouting political shit into a crowded room of strangers, it was about showing baby pictures to your friends and family, and making people listen to your awful autoplay music while they were there. Now it's all monetized, the same 3 sites full of people screaming at each other. I would sacrifice all the good to go back to the age of web rings and no search engines. The problem is that social media is an inversion of how social interaction is supposed to work. It works without consequence. Consequence is an absolutely fundamental and essential part of human interaction. Social shunning is an essential part as well, and being able to see others turning their back is also key. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you go to the store to buy something, and the guy in front of you in line is ranting about how the government is putting radios in his teeth to limit his superpowers, what is your reaction as a normal goddamn human? Because what I would do is look at the other people in line, share a chuckle with them. This portion is important because it reaffirms you're not crazy, and that other people aren't buying into this nonsense, and then you finish up your business as quickly as possible and move away without talking to them. Now imagine the same thing on the internet. Somebody says something stupid, and you don't respond to them. Nobody sees that you didn't respond. Nobody sees the other 100 people that didn't respond because it was too stupid of a comment. It just sits there. Then one of 2 things happens. Either somebody takes the bait and sits down with them as an equal, giving them an equal platform where both opinions are equally valid, or another tooth radio nutbag finds a home with a like-minded crazy person, and they go out to recruit more crazy people. Finding like-minded crazy people and concentrating is a large part of the destructive power of social media. The removal of consequence. The removal of sane people recognizing each other in the room, not interacting with the crazy people. Look at the results of this though. As long as you can get attention, you can stay in public focus. People say absurd shit just to be offensive, and then inevitably they're going to get a discussion going with them as the center of it. So all conversations end up being between lunatics and people who enjoy arguing with lunatics. All of the reasonable folks have shaken their heads and walked away without posting. Take that environment, and grow a generation up with it as normal, with that being the world they see. I can't imagine growing up now with this perception that the entire world is at war with itself, because every voice that speaks is to be hatefully screaming at another voice or else it won't exist. Rampant depression should not be a feature of a generation. They deserve better than this. Bottom line is this: social media would have been a great thing if not for horrible people being untethered from consequence. And there are still good social media communities out there. Heavily moderated social media and smaller communities that still function like normal human interaction. But any area with a lack of consequence will degrade into a cesspit, because the worst people are the ones who enjoy the way it is, whether or not they would admit it to themselves. The pristine mountain lake where we used to go swimming and fishing has been ruined by development and pollution. Pines and other trees that once surrounded the lake have been eliminated and oversized houses built in their place. As I once described on AskReddit, the formerly pure lake water has been contaminated due to development and toxic gas, oil spills and discharge from motorboat engines. The fish are gone, and a previously peaceful atmosphere is now dominated by the roar of outboard engines. No computers, no internet, no cell phones. Men were not allowed to wear hats indoors. Elders were addressed as Mr., Mrs. or Miss, or Sir/Ma'am, and first names were never allowed because it was disrespectful. Nothing was open on Sunday except for churches. It was family day and always revolved around a huge dinner. Women weren't allowed to wear pants to work. Getting a divorce was taboo and scandalous and looked down upon. You were supposed to stick it out no matter what. The ability to have one parent work, dad of course, while mom stayed home to take care of the house and kids, and you could survive on that one paycheck. Women were not allowed to work when they became pregnant unless they didn't tell anybody they were pregnant, and were able to hide the baby bump. Black kids were forced to sit at the back of the bus and could not use the same water fountains as white kids. They were also forced to sit at the back of the classrooms. You had to share a party line phone. You had a police officer that walked the beat in your neighborhood. It was rare to lock the doors to your home because crime wasn't an issue. I was beaten with a ruler in the first grade by my teacher because I was left-handed, thus stupid. And this was not considered child abuse. No advanced meteorology. You didn't know what the weather was going to be until it actually happened. Sex was never publicly discussed. Married couples on TV always slept in separate twin beds. It's been kind of remarkable watching people switch from don't trust anything on the internet. Anyone can post literally anything they want to. I saw it on Facebook, so it must be true. Wasn't that long that everyone knew not to give your name or address to strangers on the internet, and not to get into cars with strangers. Now we use the internet to call strangers to our house to give us a ride to the bar. They've really cracked down on underage tobacco and alcohol use. When I was a teenager in the late 90s, they were just starting to get cranky about it, but it was still doable, or, at the very least, the worst they do would be to call home and tattle on you. Not that I should condone underage use, but kids today have it a lot harder and they will prosecute you if you try. The chemical composition of the environment we live in. On the good side, a lot less lead, asbestos, CFCs and other super dangerous chemicals. On the bad side, a lot more CO2, microplastics, pharmaceutical byproducts and other super dangerous chemicals. We've proven before that we can stop doing stupid things that destroy our environment. I'm afraid we are too distrustful and politically fractured to work together like that now. I've had these weird nostalgic moments where the weather feels like it did when I was a kid. Nice summer weather, Generally it's sporadic nowadays, and as we head into another heat wave it's worth remembering that while we might have had them as kids it wasn't like this. Heat waves were going from the 80s to the 90s and maybe low 100s, not going from 68 to 95, back to 75, up to 90, down to 70 and then hovering at 90 with no wind for a week. We were talking about this the other day. I live in Northeast Tennessee, and when I was a kid, 90s, we would panic if the temp got up to 100 def. Now it's a regular occurrence. The opposite is also true. I work swing shift and one night about 3 years ago, it got down to -10 F. That was not the wind chill. That was the actual temp. The way the weather swings to the extremes now is ridiculous. We would only see snow accumulation once every 2-3 years. Now it's several times a year. I know most areas will look at these temps and scoff, but 100+ F and 90+ humidity will mess you up, and a -10 F. I was not prepared for this, as most of the time the low is around 20 F. I did not have the proper clothes to be outside working in that. Everything seems to only get worse. I'm relatively young at 20, but I feel like being born in this time has to be a curse. All I ever hear in the news are bad things, and it's depressing. Stuff like climate change and COVID. I feel like I'll never be able to have a chance at living a normal life, let alone my dream life. If I even get to die of old age. I'm late 20s, and I've been hit with this realization 2 years ago. 15 years ago, in high school, climate change was discussed a lot in our curriculum, though it was "our grandchildren will suffer" warning. But now, I've got the feeling we're already starting to see people suffering from it. Also, growing up I had the impression we had studied most branches of health, and so we had enough understanding that worrying about contagious diseases sounded like paranoia. 2020 was quite the wake-up call too. Really depends on the parents and how they raise the kids. My kids get very limited screen time and are fine without screens. My 6-year-old spends most days outside from the time she wakes up until she goes to bed with friends, riding bikes, making games up, and just being a kid. She comes to eat and that's it. We do have a very safe neighborhood. Luckily I know many aren't as lucky, plus tons of kids on the street. I personally grew up in the 90s with zero limits on screens. I watched TV all day and played my Saga non-stop, plus we got AOL when I was 7, so I used that a lot too. And I have a really hard time entertaining myself without them, so that's why I'm trying to keep my kids off them. The internet and other communications, unquestionably. Electronics generally. When I was a kid, calls to grandma, on the West Coast, we were in Europe, were for Christmas and birthdays only, and were booked in advance, and kept short. If you were unlucky, you got a satellite link with really high latency. Even within the US, you thought hard about whether a call was local or long distance. Your household had one telephone, usually in the entrance hall, wired to the wall. Now I video chat for hours with people in any location without even thinking of the cost, from a powerful mobile computer that fits in my pocket. Cartoons. As someone who grew up with the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, it definitely wouldn't be approved of in this day and age. Like, it hinted at a porn site and death by firing squad, and that's not even scratching the surface. With cartoons being how they are today, I doubt that anyone would get away with that unless it's hidden well enough to be overlooked by the network it shows on. And with how sensitive people are about things now, I'm positive that if Johnny Bravo were created today, it would cause an absolute riot. It's weird to think about how TV was back when I was a kid compared to today. Your evenings during the week revolved around shows that you had to watch. There wasn't a good guarantee of when new episodes would be repeated, so if you didn't have a VCR that could record, you had to watch each show as they aired or just live with talking to someone about it the next day. If you had two shows you liked that aired at the same time, you'd have to pick one and try to watch the other during the off-season. Specialized channels were starting to pop up. so it was neat getting to see Cartoon Network start up and Saturday morning cartoons fall out of style. There was also less to watch, so it wasn't as easy to just binge an entire weekend away with new content. When I was in elementary school, I remember when it was announced that the world population had reached 5 billion. It took billions of years for the world to accumulate that many people. Inside my lifetime, we've gained more than 40% of that quantity.